Welcome to another edition of Around the Table with Stacy Smith as we take a look at the economy and investing. Millions of people are investing more money in money market funds because of higher interest rates. But it is a double-edged sword because those higher interest rates on savings also mean higher interest rates on credit cards, loans, and especially new mortgages. That is part of the discussion we're going to have this week in this week's edition of Around the Table with Stacy Smith. And I'd like to introduce you now to my panel of analysts and experts as far as the economy and investing goes. And they are, with a prime seat at the table, Carrie Coghill. Carrie is the president and CEO of Coghill Investment Strategies, which is headquartered here in Pittsburgh. Carrie has been recognized by Forbes as one of the top women wealth advisors in the country. Also seated at the table is Frank Rossetti. Frank is the managing director of HF Management Company, which is part of an alternative asset partnership. Now, Frank's background includes 50 years in the investing field, and he also helped to establish Harvest Financial here in Pittsburgh, where he was the executive chairman. Across the table, we find Kim Forrest. Kim is the chief investment officer and the founder of Boca Capital Partners. Kim has a dual background in both finance and in software engineering, and you may have seen Kim in her many appearances on CNBC, Bloomberg, and also on Fox Business. And in the chair and ready to go is Michael Godwin with Fergasso Advisors. Michael has a solid career in investing and is also the chief investment officer for Fergasso Financial Advisors. And again, this year, we should note that Fergasso Advisors is listed among the Barron's national top 100 independent advisors. Thank you all for joining me once again for Around the Table with Stacy Smith as we're going to talk about the economy and investing. Now, at least $36 billion. That is the amount of money that Americans poured into money market funds to try to take advantage of interest rates that have gone higher than 5%. And that was just for the week before last. So, Michael, is heavily investing in money market funds a good idea, especially since we've seen the stock market on the downside for the last 3 weeks?
Yeah, boy, I feel like I could take that question in a number of different directions, Stacy, but I guess for the sake of brevity, I'll try to be concise. We at Fergasso, we're not making wholesale changes to our client portfolios this time, but one thing we've been doing over the past 6 to 8 months or so for clients is if they have a decent amount of cash at the bank, whether it's in a checking account or a savings account, we've been helping our clients manage that excess cash by investing in those money market funds or brokered CDs. Those are generally CDs that are issued by certain banks across the country that we have access to. And we've been investing into U.S. Treasury bonds. Now, these types of investments, particularly today, are yielding closer to 5.5% in some instances. And in most cases, that's going to be about 4.5% to maybe even 5% greater than what you're getting at your local bank, whether that's in a checking account or a savings account. So we think that moving a decent portion of that money into a money market fund or to treasury instruments can make a lot of sense because you're just getting a lot more yield or a lot more return without taking on really much additional risk, if any at all. So I do think it's important to keep in mind that inflation is still elevated at around 4.5%. So when you factor that in, the real return you're getting on cash investments right now, it's not that great. It's about 1% or so, but that's still positive, which is the first time in a while we've had a positive, what we call real return on cash-like investments. But again, what I would say overall, we're not making big changes to our clients' asset allocation strategies, right? How much you have in equities, how much you have in fixed income, and how much you have in cash. But I think you can make certain tweaks to your portfolio if you want to have more exposure in a safe asset yielding about 5% or so. But I do think it really does bear repeating because I think it's very compelling that if you are sitting on cash at your local bank in a checking or savings account that's yielding likely less than half of a percentage point, please talk to your advisor about ways to boost that return without taking on really any additional risk.
Gary.
I think that Michael's point is a good one about, you have to be a little bit careful here, especially in light of Silicon Valley Bank. When we talk about money market funds are not FDIC insured. So if you want to take advantage of higher yields and do it in an insured environment, that's where you're looking at, potentially CDs, US Treasuries, although, you know, there's always risk of default in this environment. A decision to invest in, and I don't call it invest, in money market or CDs is really driven by the time frame. And CDs, generally, money markets are short-term investments. So even though you may be getting 5% today, you're locking your money up. I mean, if you're getting 5% today on a money market, that can go down. So that's not really an investment. If we see interest rates go down, we'll see yields on money markets go down. And then if you're buying a CD, let's say for a year, then once that money matures, then you have another decision to make. So, you know, it really is driven by risk tolerance and time frame as to how these shorter term, higher yielding securities are utilized.
Go ahead.
I think in every segment, we are going to talk about the interest rate environment that we're living in, which is one of the weirdest I think we've ever experienced. Last year was weird, and this year's going to be weird in yet another different way. But you have to understand, any of these interest rate based products that are not FDIC insured can and will move quickly. In the last week or so, the bond interest rates have moved up dramatically, and that has driven people to this asset class. But it can go the other way very, very quickly. And we'll talk about why, but the Fed has the keys to the kingdom here, especially in short-term rates. That's the only thing that they can actually set, is what is the overnight lending rate for banks. And people are guessing about what they're going to do over the next 18 months. And we'll see if they're guessing right. But I think a lot of this volatility is caused by people guessing. And I don't know that I'd want to make a long-term investment decision based on guessing what people might do.
Stacy, when you allocate money, there's three components typically. There are equities, there are bonds, and there's cash. And the cash portion is what we've been talking about. And it certainly makes sense to have that in a money fund of some sort. However, over the last 10, 20 years, with interest rates being so low, a lot of the bond market allocation has been skewed towards floating rate securities or other things that are not as interest rate sensitive as a general bond. Today, as interest rates rise, there will come a point where it starts making sense to move some of those alternative bond investments that were made over to actual bonds where you lock in a rate of return, because at some point in time, no one knows when, there will be a recession. And when that happens, in all likelihood, interest rates will start to drop. And the bonds will become an appreciation vehicle at that point, as well as an interest vehicle. So cash is a great place to park money that you're going to use for something else in the short term. But if it's an investment, I'd be starting to think about when I lock these rates in with a longer term investment.
All right. Good advice. We have to take a break. We'll be back in just a moment.